It was a normal day when everything changed. I never imagined that the people I thought were family could turn on me so quickly, but they did. You see, I had always been the loving wife, always supporting my husband, trying to build a life we could be proud of. Little did I know his family had other plans. It started innocently enough. His mother, always overly critical, began making little remarks. I ignored them at first, thinking it was just her way of showing concern. But as time went on, it became clear that she wasn't just being concerned. She was starting to paint me in a bad light, twisting everything I did into something wrong. She would whisper things in my husband's ear, things that weren't true, but I never thought it would escalate to what happened next. One evening, during dinner at his parents' house, everything went downhill. His sister started accusing me of things I didn't even understand. "She's been sneaking around," his sister said, eyes wide with exaggerated drama. "I know it. I've seen her talking to strange men." I was stunned. I had no idea what she was talking about. "This is ridiculous," I said, trying to brush it off. But they didn't stop. They kept going, piling on the accusations, each more outrageous than the last. My husband, who I thought would defend me, just sat there looking at me like I had done something wrong. His silence spoke volumes, and for the first time, I realized that I was truly alone in that room. The people I had welcomed into my life, the people I had trusted, were now painting me as a liar and a cheat. I couldn't understand it. How had things gotten this bad? I was angry, hurt, and betrayed. But more than that, I felt a cold determination building inside me. No one, especially not his family, was going to destroy my reputation. I wasn't going to let them control my life, especially when I hadn't done a thing wrong. It was time for me to take control and expose the truth. I knew I had to act quickly. If I let them continue, I would lose everything: my husband, my dignity, my peace of mind. So I started gathering evidence. I documented every conversation, every message, every false accusation. I even started recording their conversations when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I knew that the truth was on my side, but it didn't matter unless I could prove it. One day, I caught a glimpse of a message on my husband's mother's phone. It was a conversation between her and his sister, and it was clear they had been planning this all along. They had fabricated the entire story to turn him against me. The betrayal was too much. It wasn't just about my reputation. It was about how they had been using their influence over my husband to control his life. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart race. This was my moment. I couldn't back down now. I had to confront them all, lay everything out on the table, and expose their lies for the world to see. I gathered my strength and called for a family meeting. It was time for the truth to come out. When everyone was gathered in the living room, I stood tall, not letting any of them see how much I was trembling inside. "I know what you've been doing," I said, my voice steady but filled with the weight of everything I had been through. "The lies you've spread, the way you've tried to destroy my marriage, my character, it ends now." The silence in the room was deafening. They tried to deny it, of course, but I wasn't backing down. I pulled out the messages, the recordings, the evidence I had painstakingly gathered. I watched their faces change from smug confidence to sheer disbelief. They had never expected me to fight back. They thought I was weak, that I would just take their lies and go quietly. But I had learned a powerful lesson over the past few weeks. I was stronger than they ever thought. I had nothing to hide. My husband's face turned pale as he realized what had been happening behind his back. He had been manipulated, just like I had. The guilt on his face was palpable, and in that moment, I knew that the truth was the only thing that could save us. It was hard to watch his family try to backtrack, to apologize, to claim they never meant for things to go this far. But it was too late. The damage had been done. And while I knew it would take time to rebuild the trust in my marriage, I also knew that I had taken control of my life again. I had exposed the lies. I had stood up for myself, and I wasn't going to let anyone ever treat me like that again. As for my husband, we worked through the aftermath together. The road wasn't easy, but he learned a hard lesson about who he could trust, and so did I. I had learned that when the people closest to you betray you, you don't just sit back and let it happen. You fight back, you stand your ground, and you take control of your own life. This experience taught me something invaluable. Never let anyone, no matter who they are, tear you down. Stand tall, speak your truth, and expose the lies. No one can take your power away unless you let them. The days after the confrontation were a mix of emotions. I felt a sense of relief. Finally, the truth was out. But I also felt a strange emptiness. There had been a time when I had hoped that his family would accept me, that I could belong, that I could be part of something bigger than myself. But now I had to face the reality. They were never going to treat me the way I deserved. I had to let go of that dream and focus on rebuilding what really mattered, my relationship with my husband and my own sense of peace. My husband and I spent countless hours talking, sometimes fighting, sometimes crying. The damage wasn't easy to repair. The trust that had been broken wasn't something you could fix overnight. But one thing was clear. He wanted to make things right. His regret was real, and his willingness to work on our relationship meant the world to me. But it wasn't enough just to say sorry. Actions, I had learned, were what mattered. As much as I had been betrayed by his family, I also felt betrayed by my own husband. If he had been more present, if he had trusted me more, maybe things wouldn't have escalated so badly. But that's the hard truth about relationships. They take work, understanding, and a level of commitment that goes beyond just loving each other. It's about showing up for each other, especially when things get hard. We decided to go to therapy. It was a difficult decision for me, because I had always been the kind of person who kept things to herself. But after everything that had happened, I knew we needed help. I couldn't carry the weight of the betrayal alone, and neither could he. We both needed to learn how to communicate better, how to trust again, and how to rebuild what was broken. Therapy wasn't easy. There were many moments when I wanted to walk out, when I felt like the wounds were too deep to heal. But there was also progress. Slowly, we started to understand each other more. I started to see how my husband had been manipulated by his family, how his silence wasn't always a sign of betrayal. It was his way of avoiding conflict, of trying to keep peace. But in doing so, he had let me down. And now he had to prove that he was ready to be the partner I needed. One of the hardest parts was dealing with his family. They tried to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to forgive them so easily. They had crossed a line, and no amount of apologies would take back the damage they had caused. It wasn't just about the lies they told. It was about the way they had tried to tear us apart, to turn us against each other. They didn't deserve a place in my life anymore. But for my husband, it was different. He was torn. He didn't want to lose me, but he also didn't want to lose his family. And that's when I realized something important. I couldn't make that decision for him. He had to decide what kind of relationship he wanted to have with them, and whether he was willing to protect our marriage above everything else. It took time, but eventually, he made his choice. He distanced himself from his family. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt, but we made it through together. We both learned a lot about what it means to trust, to communicate, and to choose each other every day. I had been betrayed, hurt, and humiliated, but I had come out stronger. And my husband, too, had learned what it meant to be truly loyal, to protect the people you love. The most important lesson I took from all of this was that no one can break you unless you let them. Life may throw betrayal your way, but you have the power to rise above it. You can expose the lies, take control of your life, and rebuild from the rubble. It's not easy, and it's not always fair, but it is possible. I chose to take control, to fight for my dignity and my future. And in the end, that was the best decision I ever made. So if you're out there feeling betrayed, remember, you have the power to take control of your story. No one can take that from you. Stand tall, expose the truth, and don't let anyone dim your light. You are stronger than you know. In the months that followed, things slowly began to settle. The road to healing wasn't smooth. Far from it. There were days when I doubted whether we would make it, when the weight of everything felt too much to bear. But in the quiet moments, I realized something that had been missing from my life for so long. Peace. I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into a world that wasn't mine, trying to prove myself to people who would never accept me. The fight with my husband's family had opened my eyes. The truth was, I had been afraid for so long to stand up for myself, to show them who I really was. But in exposing their lies, I had found a new strength. I realized that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The most difficult part of all this was learning how to rebuild my trust, not just with my husband, but with myself. I had been so betrayed that I had started doubting my own instincts, my own judgment. I questioned everything I had believed in, including my relationship. Could I trust again? Would we be able to move forward after everything we'd been through? But with every conversation we had in therapy, with every step we took toward understanding each other better, I felt myself healing. Slowly, I started to trust my husband again. I started to believe in us. And just as importantly, I started to trust myself again. I knew now that I had the strength to handle anything life threw at me. I had faced the worst, and I had survived. We didn't just come back together because of love. It wasn't that simple. We came back together because we had both chosen to fight for each other. We chose to confront the issues, to lay everything out on the table no matter how messy or painful it was. We were both willing to work, to sacrifice, to rebuild what had been broken. My relationship with his family, however, was a different story. Despite everything, I wasn't willing to let go of my own peace for their sake. After the confrontation, I had made it clear that I couldn't and wouldn't allow them back into my life the way they had been before. They had crossed a line, and it wasn't just about the lies. They had tried to tear us apart, to manipulate and control. They had shown me exactly who they were, and I wasn't going to let them hurt me again. I made peace with the fact that some people just aren't worth fighting for. Still, I understood why my husband struggled with this. He didn't want to lose his family. I didn't expect him to completely cut them off. but I had to draw the line somewhere. The distance between us and them became a boundary, one that I had put in place to protect our marriage and our future. Over time, my husband learned to prioritize me and our relationship. He stopped seeking validation from his family and started looking inward to what truly mattered, the life we were building together. He understood that family loyalty didn't mean sacrificing his own happiness, his own integrity. He made a choice to stand by me, and that's something I would never take for granted. And so, our life started to regain its rhythm. We traveled more, spent more time together, and slowly we started dreaming again about a future we could build without the interference of toxic people, without the shadows of past betrayals looming over us. Our marriage wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was ours. It was real. And in that truth, I found my peace. What I've learned is that betrayal doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to destroy you. In fact, it can be the catalyst for the most powerful change you will ever experience. You don't have to fight others' battles, and you certainly don't have to tolerate people who don't respect you. You are stronger than their lies, and your future is brighter than their manipulation. So, to anyone out there who's been through something similar, I want you to know this. Take control of your life. Expose the truth, stand your ground, and rebuild on your own terms. The pain may be deep, but your strength is deeper. And no one, not even the people closest to you, can take that from you. The months continued to pass, and though the scars of betrayal still lingered, the healing process had begun to take root. It wasn't instantaneous. There were days I woke up feeling like the weight of everything had come crashing down again. There were times when the anger and hurt would resurface, sometimes triggered by something as simple as a memory or a fleeting thought. But slowly, the darkness began to fade, replaced by a stronger, more resilient version of myself. Therapy had been a game changer. My husband and I worked through our issues together, not just focusing on our marriage, but on how we viewed ourselves individually. I started to realize that for so long, I had been looking for validation from others, especially his family. I wanted to fit in, to be accepted, to belong. But in doing so, I lost sight of what truly mattered, my own worth. I learned to stop measuring my value based on the approval of others. I understood that I didn't need anyone's approval, especially not from people who had already proven they couldn't be trusted. I needed to approve of myself first. That's where my true strength came from. Not from pleasing others or seeking their validation, but from within. I started taking care of my emotional needs, setting boundaries, and putting my well-being first. As my husband and I continued to rebuild our relationship, something shifted within him too. The distance between him and his family grew, and it wasn't as painful as I had expected. I watched him, with time, come to terms with the reality that he couldn't let his family dictate his happiness anymore. He began making his own decisions, not for their sake, but for ours. It wasn't easy for him. There were moments of guilt, moments when he wanted to reach out to them, to somehow fix what had been broken. But he knew, deep down, that we couldn't heal while still being surrounded by that toxicity. We learned to communicate more openly, our marriage slowly becoming what it was always meant to be. It was never perfect, but we didn't need it to be. What mattered was that we were in it together, facing our challenges and growing stronger with each passing day. The love that was once overshadowed by doubt and betrayal began to take root again. this time built on a foundation of honesty, trust, and respect. But despite our progress, I couldn't ignore the deeper lesson that had come from this entire ordeal. The true test of a relationship is not how you fare in the good times, but how you navigate the hard times. And I knew that I had passed that test. I had faced betrayal head on, taken control of my life, and rebuilt what had been broken. I had found a strength in myself I never knew existed. Still, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The world hadn't magically become kind, and life continued to throw challenges our way. But I didn't fear the future anymore. I knew that no matter what came our way, I could handle it. I had already faced the worst and survived. I had proven to myself that I could take control and fight back. Looking back, I realized how far I had come. From a woman who had been betrayed, manipulated, and humiliated to someone who was now walking in her own truth. I was no longer afraid of losing anyone's approval, and I had learned that my happiness was in my own hands. No one could take that from me. This journey wasn't easy. It never is when you're standing up for what's right, for your own peace and well-being. But it taught me one invaluable lesson. You don't need anyone's permission to live your truth. Stand firm in who you are, expose the lies, and take control. Your peace is worth fighting for, and nothing, absolutely nothing, is worth sacrificing it. As the months passed, I began to notice something else shifting within me, a change in how I viewed the world. It wasn't just about healing from the betrayal anymore. It was about growth. The process of rebuilding myself, my trust, and my relationship with my husband had ignited something deep inside. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. The strength I had discovered during the hardest moments of my life became the foundation of everything I did. Every decision, every action was now rooted in self-respect. And I found that I wasn't as afraid of confrontation as I used to be. I had fought for my dignity, for my marriage, and for my peace. And in doing so, I realized I had gained a power that couldn't be easily shaken. For so long, I had allowed others to dictate my worth. His family's accusations, the pressure to fit into a role they had created for me, the betrayal, it all made me question my own value. But now I saw things differently. I knew that my worth wasn't defined by others' opinions or their manipulation. It was defined by the choices I made and the life I chose to build for myself. This newfound clarity was freeing. I started to focus on the things I had neglected for so long. My passions, my dreams, and my own aspirations. I realized I had put everything on hold for the sake of keeping the peace, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for me. But now, I knew I was worthy of pursuing my own happiness. My husband and I continued to heal, though the journey was far from over. There were still moments of tension, moments when the old wounds seemed to reopen. But we were learning to navigate those moments with a deeper understanding of each other. He knew now that I wasn't someone who would stay silent when treated unjustly. I had a voice, and I would use it, not just for myself, but for us. We also began to talk about the future, our future, and I realized that this was where the real work began. It wasn't just about moving past the hurt and betrayal. It was about creating a future that reflected who we were as individuals and as a couple. The foundation of trust that had been shattered needed to be rebuilt carefully, but this time, it was built on something stronger. It was built on mutual respect, and the knowledge that we both had the power to choose each other every single day. I also realized that the road to healing was not linear. There were times when I doubted whether I had truly forgiven. Forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't about forgetting. It was about releasing the grip of the past so it no longer had power over me. It was about making the conscious choice to move forward, not because I owed it to anyone, but because I owed it to myself. The most surprising part of all this was the peace that I had found within myself. For the first time in years, I felt whole. I wasn't defined by the betrayal or the hurt. I wasn't defined by the lies. I was simply Ava, a woman who had been through hell but who had come out stronger, wiser, and more in control of her own life. And so I started to look ahead with a sense of optimism I hadn't known in a long time. There were still challenges, still moments of uncertainty, but they no longer scared me. I had faced the worst, and I had survived. The future? It was mine to shape. And I knew now, with certainty, that nothing, absolutely nothing, could take away my peace again. Life had given me a tough lesson, but it also had given me something priceless: the power to rise above, to expose the truth, and to take control of my own happiness. And that, more than anything, was what truly mattered. As time passed, I started to feel a sense of normalcy return to my life. But it wasn't the same normal I had known before. No, this time, it was a better version of me. A version that was stronger, more resilient, and unwilling to let the past define me any longer. The healing was slow, but it was steady. And with each passing day, I found myself rediscovering pieces of who I was before everything had spiraled out of control. I became more attuned to my own needs, something I had neglected for far too long. I started taking care of myself, both physically and emotionally. I began working out again, something I had loved to do before the chaos took over. The stress and emotional toll of the betrayal had left me exhausted, but now I found strength in my own body, in the simple act of moving again. Every drop of sweat felt like a release, like I was washing away the remnants of all the hurt I had carried for so long. But it wasn't just the physical aspect that had changed. Emotionally, I began to reconnect with my passions, the things that once brought me joy but had been buried under the weight of guilt and doubt. I picked up a paintbrush again, something I hadn't done in years, and I poured my feelings onto the canvas. It was a cathartic experience, each stroke of paint allowing me to release the pain, the anger, and the frustration I had held on to for so long. And as I worked through my own healing, I noticed a shift in my relationship with my husband. The bond we had once had, that had been tested and nearly destroyed by betrayal, started to grow stronger. We had learned to communicate better, to express our feelings without fear of judgment or dismissal. We no longer kept things bottled up inside, and that made all the difference. He had changed too. His realization of how deeply his family's influence had affected our marriage had been a wake-up call. He wasn't the same person who had remained silent when his family accused me. No, now he was someone who was actively fighting to protect what mattered most: our relationship. His actions spoke louder than any apology ever could. Slowly, I began to believe in him again, not because I had to, but because he had earned my trust. But even with all the progress, there were still moments when the hurt crept back in. The scars of betrayal don't vanish overnight. There were times when the old feelings of anger and frustration bubbled up, moments when I would catch myself questioning whether I was truly ready to forgive and forget. But then I reminded myself of the journey I had been on. Forgiveness was a choice, not just for him, but for me. I knew that holding on to the anger would only keep me shackled to the past. Letting go was about freedom. Freedom to move forward, to rebuild, and to love without the constant weight of resentment. In those quiet moments of reflection, I began to understand something crucial. Healing isn't linear. There were days when I would feel on top of the world, and other days when I would feel like I was back at square one. But that was okay. The important part was that I kept moving forward, one step at a time. I wasn't perfect, and neither was my husband. But together, we were learning how to love each other in a way that was more real, more authentic. And though the road ahead wasn't always clear, I had come to accept that we didn't need all the answers right now. What mattered was that we were in this together, fighting for our love, for our peace, and for the future we wanted to build. The biggest lesson I learned through all of this was that true strength lies in choosing to move forward, even when it feels impossible. The pain of betrayal doesn't define you unless you allow it to. You have the power to rise, to heal, and to take control of your own happiness. And I, for one, was finally ready to do just that. As I continued to rebuild my life, I began to realize just how much strength I had gained from everything I had been through. It wasn't just about surviving the betrayal anymore. It was about thriving in spite of it. I had taken control of my happiness and peace, and that was something no one could take away from me. But even as things improved in my marriage, I still struggled with certain aspects of my past. His family remained a constant shadow in the background, despite my husband's efforts to distance himself from them. It was hard not to feel that underlying tension every time they reached out, even when he made it clear he was no longer willing to engage with them in the same way. The damage they had caused couldn't be easily undone, and while I didn't want to hold on to the bitterness, it was difficult to entirely let go of the anger I still felt. I couldn't understand how they had been so cruel, how they had manipulated him into doubting me, into making me the villain when I had only ever tried to be a good wife. The betrayal wasn't just about the lies. They had tried to tear us apart, to break something that was sacred to us. That would always sting. But as time passed, I began to shift my perspective. I realized that my healing wasn't just about fixing the relationship with my husband or distancing myself from his family. It was about releasing the hold the past had on me. Holding on to anger and resentment, as much as I thought it justified, wasn't going to change the past. It was only going to keep me stuck in a place of hurt, unable to move forward. So I made a decision to release the weight of the past. Forgiveness was no longer about them, but about me. It wasn't about letting them off the hook. It was about giving myself the freedom to heal completely. I didn't have to forget what they had done, but I could choose to stop letting their actions control my emotions and my life. The more I worked on letting go, the more I realized just how much I had transformed. I had become someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for herself, someone who valued her peace above all else. I didn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy. I had earned my strength, and I was proud of the woman I had become. My relationship with my husband continued to evolve, and while there were still challenges, we both worked hard to navigate them. He had learned to set clearer boundaries with his family, and that meant the world to me. I could see how much he had grown, how much he had learned to appreciate and protect our relationship. He wasn't perfect, but I could see the effort, and that was what mattered. We were learning to trust each other again, to love each other more deeply, and to communicate in ways that we hadn't before. It was in those quiet moments, those small gestures, that I knew we were on the right path. We didn't need a perfect marriage. We just needed a real one. A marriage where we both fought for each other, where we understood that it wasn't always going to be easy, but we were committed to making it work. Looking back, I couldn't help but be grateful for the lessons that the betrayal had taught me. It had shown me how strong I really was, how much I could overcome. I had taken control of my life, and in doing so, I had found my peace. The journey was far from over, but I had learned something that would stay with me forever. I am in control of my happiness, no one else. And with that, I knew that no matter what life threw my way, I would always rise above it. The past no longer had power over me. I was free, and that was all I ever needed. As the months went on, life began to feel more like it had before the betrayal. Calmer, more settled. But I had changed. The woman I was before had been consumed by the need to please others, to fit into a role that wasn't meant for me. Now I was different. I had learned the value of standing up for myself, of demanding respect, and most importantly, I had learned how to choose peace over chaos, no matter the cost. I found myself reflecting more often, thinking about how much I had learned through all the pain, how much I had gained from going through something so difficult. I had seen sides of myself I didn't know existed, strengths I never thought I had. The emotional toll of what had happened still lingered, but it no longer controlled me. I had confronted the worst, exposed the lies, and come out on the other side stronger than ever. One day, as I was sitting in the quiet of my home, I thought about what the future held for us. My husband and I had spent so much time working on our relationship, but we both knew that we couldn't let our past define us forever. We had to move forward, not just in our marriage, but in our lives as individuals. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. We had both learned so much about each other, about ourselves, and about what it meant to truly fight for the things that mattered. But there was still one thing I knew I had to do: let go of the final remnants of the past. I had worked hard to forgive his family, to free myself from the anger that had held me captive for so long. But forgiveness wasn't just about letting them off the hook. It was about reclaiming my power. It was about no longer allowing them, or anyone, to control my emotions or dictate my happiness. I had learned that holding on to past grievances only held me back from the life I deserved. I realized that I had to stop trying to control the things I couldn't change: their actions, their opinions, their inability to see the truth. I couldn't change what they had done to me, but I could change how I responded. Forgiveness didn't mean I was weak or accepting of their treatment. It meant I was strong enough to move on, to let go, and to not allow them to have a hold over my future any longer. Over time, my relationship with my husband grew stronger. The doubts that had once crept into my mind about whether or not we could survive this betrayal were slowly fading. We were learning to love each other in a new way, with deeper understanding and appreciation. He was no longer the man who had failed to defend me in front of his family. He had become the man who stood by me, who understood that family loyalty didn't mean sacrificing the happiness and well-being of the person you love. There were still moments when the past crept up on us, when the scars of betrayal seemed too fresh to ignore. But we had learned to navigate those moments with compassion and patience. We no longer saw each other through the lens of past hurts. Instead, we saw the possibility of the future we could build together. And as for me, I continued to grow. I found new passions, rediscovered old dreams, and learned to put myself first. I understood that healing wasn't just about forgiving others, it was about forgiving myself. I had spent so much of my life seeking approval from everyone around me, from his family, from him. But now I knew that I didn't need anyone's approval but my own. The most important lesson I took away from all of this was that healing is a choice, and it starts from within. No one can define your worth unless you let them. And when you choose to take control of your life, your peace, and your happiness, no one, not even the people who betrayed you, can take that from you. As I looked ahead, I was no longer afraid of what might come. I had faced the worst and come out stronger, and I knew now that I could handle anything. The road may have been difficult, but it was mine to walk, and I was ready for whatever came next. As the months rolled on, the wounds from the betrayal began to heal more completely, though I knew deep down that I'd never be the same person I was before everything happened. And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I had become stronger, wiser, and more aware of what truly mattered in life. But that was only half of it. What I hadn't anticipated was the sense of empowerment that had emerged from my pain. I had spent so much of my life putting others' needs above my own, desperately trying to fit in and seek approval. But now I knew that the only approval I truly needed was my own. My relationship with my husband had grown into something new, something better. The love was there, but it wasn't the naive love we had once shared. It was more grounded, more mature. We had learned the hard way what true trust meant. Our bond had been tested in ways I hadn't expected, but we had faced those tests head on, and we were still here, together, stronger than before. But the real breakthrough came in the way I started living for myself. Not just for him, not just for anyone else, but for me. I no longer felt the need to seek validation from anyone, least of all his family. I had fought for my peace, and I had earned it. I had learned that peace is something you create, not something you wait for others to give you. And in doing so, I had freed myself from the shackles of resentment and fear. I started pursuing the things I had put aside for so long: my career, my dreams, and even just the simple joys of life. I had spent so much time focused on the drama, on the hurt, and on trying to prove myself to people who didn't deserve it. Now I was living for myself, and it was liberating. I found new passions, rekindled old friendships, and most importantly, I found happiness in places I hadn't looked before. I knew now that my happiness wasn't dependent on others. It was mine to own, and I would never let anyone take that away from me again. But as I reflect on this journey, the most important lesson I've learned is this: the past doesn't define you, but how you move forward does. You can't control what people do to you, but you can control how you react and how you choose to rise above it. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about setting yourself free. And once you make that choice, once you take control of your own narrative, nothing can hold you back. I could have let that betrayal destroy me, let it break me into pieces. But instead, I chose to take back my power. I exposed the truth, I stood up for myself, and I chose peace. And in doing that, I became the woman I was always meant to be. If you're out there facing your own struggles, if you've been betrayed or hurt, remember, you have the strength to rise above it. Your peace is in your hands. It's time to take control of your story. If you found this story inspiring and want to see more stories of resilience, strength, and the power of taking control of your life, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You won't want to miss the next chapter. It might just change your life. Stay strong, take control, and remember, you are in charge of your happiness. Keep fighting for it.